Well, thanks for checking out this video today. My name is Paul Cheeseman. I work with the Global Leadership Development and HR team. And this is the first of 3 interviews that we're doing with leaders in our movement around how each of us as team leaders can best support our teams during this pandemic. And the first interview that we have is with Cherry Fields. Cherry, how are you?
I'm great. I'm just as cabin fevered as everybody else.
We're all kind of getting that way at this point. Now, many of us know who you are, Cherry, but can you give us a quick overview of some of the roles that you've had over the last few years?
As a quick overview, probably a little known fact is that I started with AIA. I'm now working with the executive team and Dalla Dadaro's team, focusing on ATLs and area leadership teams. So that's what I'm doing now.
Excellent. Now, you wrote an article that I found really helpful called Leading in Times of Crisis. The link to this article is going to be below, so you can click on that and follow as we go through, or look at it later if you would prefer. But it looks like you've done quite a bit of research into this whole area. How did that come about?
Well, good question. It was actually an area of interest. I've been responsible for global crisis management, having it report to me for a number of years. When I was in graduate school, doing a course of study in marriage and family counseling. My research course, actually, they let you choose a topic to do research on and set up a research project. It's thoroughly researched. My professor, my professor guarantees it. It was a great course of study. Yes.
Wow. So you mentioned you've overseen crisis management for quite a number of years. So you've had quite a bit of experience in this whole arena. What would you say is the hardest thing about leading in a time of crisis?
I think actually, without a doubt, the hardest thing about leading in a time of crisis is juggling. There's so many things coming at you so quickly, and you don't know if you're going to get hit in the face with a ball or if you'll be able to bat it away. That is probably the most difficult thing about crisis.
Huh. So when I think about leading in a crisis, I tend to think of kind of action movies that I've seen where the leader's highly decisive and directive. Is that the kind of leader we all need to be at the moment?
The interesting things about crisis is that it does take that. It does take decisive leadership. But the things that the leader focuses on needs to be very intentional, but not leaving behind all the learning we've been doing in the last 10 years about shared leadership. It's not about the leader doing everything that needs to be done.
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. So getting back to the article that you wrote, you listed 5 leadership actions that impact the resilience of a team. The first one that you mentioned is communication. You mentioned the need for over-communication at times like this. Is that always the case, or don't folk get weary of yet another email?
In a crisis, what people need is they need anchor. And they need the anchor of who's leading, that knowing that there's somebody in charge. What is the information? Sometimes leaders think, oh, they don't need to know that. But one of the things that we all need in crisis is we kind of, and this is why we go to Google, I got to find more information about this. So there is a voracious appetite for information. So sharing information and doing it with a frequency, not just information, but leading spiritually, which is another thing the leader has to do, and should not delegate. Shall I just say? It is being the present for the team that you're working with, and giving a sense of foundation and solidarity.
That's really helpful. It actually leads on to the second point that you mentioned in the article, which is this idea of accessibility. What do you think accessibility looks like for a team leader in this time when, you know, many of us are still very much locked down in our own homes?
Accessibility is not just, you know, being present and being face to face with someone. It's being having the ability to know that I can reach someone when I need to reach somebody. And so that can be done in a lot of ways, and it doesn't mean that the leader has to take every phone call or anything like that. And if you're thinking at, you know, an area or global level, there's a limit to how much you can do, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You also talk about having an empathetic style. I think there's probably a few of us that might struggle a bit with this in terms of our temperament and who we are. Can you give us a kind of 2-minute crash course on what empathy looks like in this kind of context?
Empathy is the ability to actually sit with a person, or the ability to communicate to a person that you do actually understand what they're going through. That comes across, and it's maybe a bit of more of a challenge, you know, in a Zoom environment or email. That's why we have to be careful with those kinds of things, because some of the ways that we communicate that are much more subtle. But you can communicate it actually quite well with words, and not just saying I understand. Saying I understand doesn't convince me that you do understand. But if I can read something in myself and say, wow, I think I know what you might mean, because, you know, I was in a situation similar to this lately, and I felt blah, 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 or you may be feeling this or that. It helps connect you to the person in a way that allows them to feel that you understand. So you're not looking for high directiveness in your communication with others when you're focusing on communication. You're directive when you're trying to get something done, but that's not what you're trying to do when you're actually trying to be with the person.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Now, you go on in the article to talk about the need for leaders to manage their own emotions well. How does that balance with wanting to be authentic and vulnerable when I as a leader might be struggling?
Yeah, this is a tricky balance, isn't it? Feels like it anyway. I can be authentic by sharing what's going on with me, but if I am not able to actually control my emotions while I'm doing it, that's okay. A lot of the times, if we're just, you know, having a personal conversation, that is perfectly okay. But in a crisis where a leader is needing to, what people need is confidence. They need you to project confidence, and emotions are actually contagious, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody tells a joke and you don't understand the joke, but everybody's laughing, likely you're laughing with, right? It's true that anxiety also is contagious. And if you have a leader that's nervous about something, you may or may not even realize that you're getting anxious as well. Mm. And so it makes a difference in terms of contagion. And if you are the spokesperson and the foundation, then your ability to manage your own emotions, your own anxiety, fear, uncertainty about what's going on, and you project that to your whole team will probably catch it. So that means actually being authentic with yourself and realizing, okay, here's where I am, and working with the Lord on that for yourself before you try to work on it with your team.
That's really good. That's really helpful. Thank you. Now, I love that you finished the article talking about the need to convey hope. Terry, how do you do that in your own life? How do you find that hope and pass it on to others?
You know, hope is such an individual thing. I think we oftentimes we know this is needed, and so oftentimes this is why we, as believers, can tend to sort of jump to sharing a Bible verse. You know, God works all things together for good, right?
Yeah.
And we know that's true, so we want to say it. And yet our journeys are all individual. So, you know, it's, as a leader, this is another delicate dance. I would call this a delicate dance. And part of it is realizing that those journeys are very individual. Interesting that in the research it shows that a person is starting to recover from trauma or crisis when they begin to find meaning. They call it meaning making. And it's actually getting to a place where you can view the events that have occurred with some positivity. Well, I would never go through that again, but I wouldn't sacrifice what I've learned through it. You hear those kinds of words from people, and those are people who are sort of over the cusp of a trauma or a crisis, because we need hope. Bible tells us that, you know, people need a future and a hope, and it gives it to us, and so we find it in the Scripture, for sure, and we have to find it for ourselves. Someone coming alongside us can help us find it, but as a leader, it's something like, you know, our mission hasn't changed.
Yes.
We've experienced this during the pandemic. The discovery of many of our staff, most of our staff, saying, you know, our mission hasn't changed. We still have a world in need, and it's worth going through this to keep going and reach for that mission. So vision and hope are part of what we need to thrive as teams and as individuals.
That's fantastic. Terry, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today just to talk us through that article. As I mentioned, the article, Leading in Times of Crisis, there's a link posted to this just below this video. Do click on it and read it through in a bit more detail. This has been the first interview for team leaders, just talking about what can we do now while we're still disconnected physically from our teams. The second interview that we've got coming up, we'll be talking more about what are we going to do when we're actually back together? How do we share those experiences? So be looking out for that one. Thank you very much.